apple does not fall far from the tree. But my grandmother said that because you belong to a family, the apple really does not fall at all. You don't ever need to see them. You don't even need to know them. You are always part of that family. My name is Bena. The day my mother died in 2004, it stunned me that my older daughter did not recognize the cracked keepsakes and cracked, murky photos buried in her grandmother's closets. How would I know? She asked. She was amazed that I had expected genetics on its own to transport memory. Emily's simple question jarred me into the realization that many invaluable threads of our security blanket and chunks of our armor, our family history, would be lost on my watch unless I fortified them through stories, pictures, documents, and historical markers. I am an only child, as was my mother. With my mother's death, I was now on the top branch of my family tree. I set out to save the slivers of my family story not blotted out by the merciless 20th century, and alas, by my own lack of curiosity. I started researching family roots, meeting many new cousins, writing down my family story, and collecting photographs. The more I learned, the more it felt as if I was conjuring their presence, and as if they were speaking directly to me. So, permit me to conjure for you one branch of my tree, the children of my great-grandparents, Velvel Averbuch and Shana Gittel Kupperschmidt. In 1879, Velvel and Shana Gittel saw each other for the first time at their chuppah, wedding camp. Their fathers had arranged the marriage only a short time before. Shana Gittel gave birth 17 times over a 25-year period. But only 7 children reached adulthood. 9 died as infants or toddlers, and 1 daughter at the age of 16. Those that made it past 16 years are my 3 great aunts, Hannah, Dina, and Esther, my 3 great uncles, Avram, Yaakov, Shmuel, and Leib, and my dear grandmother, Paulina. Sadly, I do not have a photo of my great uncle Yaakov Shmuel, who was called Kutsia. So I am using a photo of my great uncle Leib as a young man, who I'm told Kutsia sort of looked like. Researching family is not an exact science, as I have learned.
Our Tata and Mama, Velvel and Shana Gittel, grew up in towns, in the nearby towns inside the Pale of Settlement, the Jewish ghetto established by Catherine the Great. These towns were called shtetls. With few exceptions, Jews were not allowed to live in the big cities of the Russian Empire. Tata and Mama lived their married life in Tata's hometown of Beler Tserkov, where we were all born.
Mama made sure that each of her children memorized the Hebrew alphabet by 2 years old and read Yiddish fluently by 4. Her daughters remained in her charge, and her sons graduated into Tata's homeschooling.
For a woman reared in a poor shtetl family, Mama possessed an uncanny sense of etiquette and dignity. She coached the children on the proper way to enter and exit a room, how to address people of different ages and status, how to unobtrusively change a topic, and how to say yes or no with eyes and body language.
When more income was needed, Mama sold tichels, head coverings for Jewish women, from clothing stalls at the market in Belyazerkov. She was an entrepreneur, and her business became a reliable source of income.
It was said of Tata, never proven, that he was descended from a prominent rabbinic dynasty dating back to 15th century Germany, the Averbuch rabbinic dynasty. This etching resembles how he looked and dressed. This man is almost a spitting image of him.
Tata was a Malami, a teacher. He taught at the yeshiva and took in private pupils, boys who strove to expand their Torah knowledge. His presence and legacy loomed large in the lives of his children and his descendants.
Tata's philosophy and household principles were more like commandments, passed through enough generations to enter the genome of all his descendants. His remarkable intuition bordered on clairvoyance. He always challenged his children to look beyond the immediate. His catchphrase was,
Suppose you prevail, und was weiter?
And
then what?
Growing up, hearing my grandmother's constant refrain, as my tata used to say, I myself cannot keep a conversation going without interjecting at some point. As my great-grandfather used to say, suppose you prevail. And then what? My great-aunt Hannah was the firstborn. She got her business marks from Shana Gittel, and her wavy hair, large eyes, and sense of superiority from Velvel. Hannah cut her queen bee teeth, bossing her siblings around. Being the oldest girl offered tangible advantages. She got to wear clothes, though used, but before they got passed down to her sisters. It was for her that the first pair of real shoes, not the usual lapti, the straw shoes the family wore most of the time, was acquired in anticipation of a shidduch. At the first whisper that she became available on the marriage market, offers began coming in.
Tata turned down anyone who asked for a dowry. For the candidates he deemed worthy of meeting in person, Tata conducted the appropriate defragging. Background check based on the town's grapevine. That included, against his better judgment, the financial standings of the prospective husband, something that I insisted he do. The few that progressed to the finals visited with the family. Tata made his preference known, but asked for my consent. The young man who swept me off my feet was not Tata's first choice, but he carried a walking stick under his arm and wore a modern top hat. Tata said yes, and with the marriage agreement signed, I and my intended went spazieren for a walk, unchaperoned, in full view of Bel Air Zerkov. I wore my real shoes for the first time. But I returned from that walk in tears. Tata, I said, he is cheap. He is a fool. He wants me to only use wood for the samovar when we both want tea. What if only I want tea? I knew then and there that this marriage would be a mistake. So Tata immediately put into motion the annulment procedure to break our engagement. Suddenly, my yikus, lineage, good looks, superior brain didn't count for much. I was now damaged goods. Tata predicted I would eventually marry, but would never have children. Every year that passed, more and more questions about my character, my mental stability, and my attributes made arranging a marriage much more painful, if not hopeless. And Tata did not offer up his daughters. They were to be sought after. I was 24 when Tata received a visitor from the nearby town of Boguslav. Chaim Melamed, an eager scholar and mediocre fish wholesaler, had lost his wife in childbirth and was looking for a new bride. Following the discussion of Chaim's requirements, Tata invited him to join the Sabbath meal. The next day, Chaim asked Tata for my hand, and I consented.
Before leaving to settle in Boguslav with her husband, Hannah made sure that people saw her purchasing new clothes and shoes at the market.
Eat your heart out, Bel Air Zerkov!
She also purchased an expensive plaid to cover her legs while riding in the carriage to her new home. That black and brown plaid was threadbare by my time, having survived a revolution and 2 world wars. Hannah took nothing from her parents' home, and she left that first pair of real shoes for my grandmother, her sister Paulina, the next bride-to-be in a family where all the girls had bigger feet than Hannah.
In Boguslav, I took over managing the business and restricted Chaim's activities to what he did best, selling fish. The business thrived. Prosperous, in a position of power, I mellowed to such a degree that I promised my sisters swanky bed covers if they married into money. If not, no gift would make a difference anyway. A dozen years later, in the face of the Bolshevik Revolution, I made Chaim sell the business. I converted the proceeds into gold coins that I sewed into hidden pockets on my garments and into small items of silverware I kept in a wicker basket mixed in with what looked like rags.
They were now living in the Soviet Union, not the Tsarist-ruled Russian Empire.
Gold and coins and other valuables would be confiscated, and we would be arrested for keeping funds from the government. Even though private property was abolished, single-family houses remained intact, and so we were allowed to stay in our house in Boguslav.
During the Great Patriotic War, as the Soviets called World War II, Hannah and Chaim evacuated to Siberia to escape the Nazi invaders. Jews who remained in Boguslav were murdered by the Nazis or by their neighbors. Hannah and Chaim's house was taken over.
After the war, we had nothing in Boguslav to go back to. My sister, Polina, arranged a residency permit for us in Kiev, where she lived. My stash of gold coins helped us buy a large, dilapidated two-room apartment on the outskirts of Kiev. Don't ask me who I bribed or how much. We were lucky. We only had to live with one other family. Most of these communal apartments had from 5 to over a dozen rooms, and rarely did a family have more than one room to themselves. The kitchen and the bath facilities, if indoor, were shared with everyone. And when they were 10, you kept your toiletries in your room, and you prepared some of your food in your room, not in the kitchen. Chaim works as a clerk at a factory for wages barely sufficient to pay for cigarettes. If it were not for injections from my stash, we would have had to depend on handouts from my siblings. A position I simply could not accept.
Hannah marked my entrance into the world with gifts to me of a silver teaspoon, a baby silver fork, and a thumb-sized silver shot glass. Each of them are alive and well and in need of polishing.
I was visiting my sister Esther in Odessa the summer you were born. I told your mother to send me a telegram if it was a boy, and a letter if it was a girl.
Always the queen bee. Hannah was loyal and dedicated to our family. My warmest childhood memories are of Hannah arriving on weekends with a chunk of halva from the market and a fresh baguette. We ate with such gusto and such love for each other that 60 years later, and long after her passing, I can still taste that mouth-watering halva and feel the love radiating from her large black eyes behind funny, thin-rimmed, round glasses. Hannah died when I was 8 years old. No silverware remained, but there were enough gold coins in her secret pockets to erect a granite tombstone. Hannah and Chaim were married for over 40 years, but as Velvel predicted, they were childless.
From darkness, from hiding, I prevail. And broad is the stride of a small foot, and strong is the knock of a slender fist. From darkness, from hiding, I prevail, and I stride with broad steps at the head of my generation. And I kindle the candles for the world's holiday, candles that for generations I piously kindled. And I stride in steps of light, and dye in holiday dyes the threads of ambition that I weave out and weave in.
never met my great-uncle Avram, Velvel and Shana Gittel's oldest son. He was Velvel's equal in ability and was homeschooled by him. Velvel's pride and hope.
Tata's pupils disappointed him. He warned me never to become a teacher. No profession is less rewarding, he said. You give your heart to convey precious knowledge, but it doesn't penetrate your pupils' minds. All you get at the end of the day is a sore throat and not enough money to put on the table. But then he added, remember that every Averbuch branch has produced at least one Melamed. I was the heir apparent to the Averbuch rabbinic dynasty. But my teenage years fell at the chaotic start of the 20th century in the Russian Empire. For me and most Jewish youth cooped up in shtetls, the urge to annihilate the old order took priority over everything else. Of the many ideologies vying for an audience, I was drawn to anarchism. I participated in clandestine meetings, wrote fiery leaflets in Yiddish, and improved my Russian to translate anarchist literature into Yiddish. Tata did not know of my involvement in these endeavors, but he incessantly disapproved of nonsense that called for utter destruction before attempting to envision I can still hear him. Suppose you prevail. And then what? Socialist, Bolshevik, anarchist labels meant nothing to him. Passionate revolutionary speeches made no sense to him. As far as he was concerned, such talk could lead to nothing good, considering that the fervent people listening to those speeches were the uneducated and the gullible. They'll throw aside tradition. And then what? One night, gendarmes of the empire trashed our house looking for me. Conveniently, I was not at home. They turned over the feather bed, searching for my leaflets, rummaged in the oven, and, the ultimate insult, rifled through Tata's books. But I was not swayed by Tata's fury over the desecrated books. I lectured him on the merits of anarchism and recommended he walk away from the doomed world of yesterday along with its Torah and start reading more relevant literature. He berated me. Now you're an anarchist. Then you'll become a socialist and then you'll become a murderer. At that time, I did not realize that this insight into his country's future was far too visionary for most of us, drunk on utopian dreams, to comprehend.
Velvel was also displeased that Avram had found a bride on his own, the daughter of a Balmalecha, a menial worker.
He believed this marriage diminished my chance of having scholarly offspring, further threatening the Averbuch rabbinical dynasty. He said, he who descends from a cat is destined to meow. And he could not forgive that I turned my back on tradition. You see, I was not just a son, but a shining star, an heir to everything Tata held sacred. I could no longer take his constant badgering. So, in 1906, I followed my bride Rose's family to the United States and ended up in Philadelphia. I changed my name to Abraham Auerbach and raised 3 children. I worked third shift in a factory as a weaver and a presser. In the daytime, I wrote. The New York Yiddish newspaper, Der Tag, The Day, published my short stories. My wife constantly nagged me. We have nothing to eat and you write. My sister Paulina wrote me that Tata pretended not to hear when Mama read my letters home out loud. Once, reacting to my admission that perhaps I had been overly enamored with anarchism, Tata commented, "So, why did I have to lose my son and he to travel so far to understand such a simple thing?" In later years, I became an insurance agent, and I taught at Gratz College, School for Jewish Studies. A teacher after all. Anarchism discarded, I turned to Zionism and spent several months in Israel in the 1950s. There, I had expected a show of reverence that befitted the heir apparent of the Averbuk rabbinic dynasty. But my lineage barely elicited any recognition.
Shortly before his death, Avram completed the Averbuk family history, a fact uncovered a half-century later in a letter sent by an unknown cousin to one of Avram's children. That cousin intended to publish Avram's manuscript, which had been left with him for safekeeping, but he died before he could do it. The manuscript was lost. Avram died in Philadelphia in 1963. When Avram came to Philadelphia in 1906, he emigrated from the Pale of Settlement, the home of the Jews portrayed in Fiddler on the Roof. In 1975, 12 years after Avram's death, the first of the old country Averbuks immigrated to the United States and sought out their Auerbach cousins. For at least 40 years, Soviet authorities had blocked correspondence between these family branches. The Iron Curtain had descended. So, the children and grandchildren of Pale of Settlement immigrants who were born in the United States mistakenly imagined their Soviet cousins who arrived in the US beginning in the 1970s, like me, to be frum, religious folk, from olden days stories and old country pictures. But when our American cousins finally met us, they met a Jew not at all like the image they held. We wore modern clothes, we were educated, we were secular, and we were completely ignorant of Jewish
tradition. Ships that sail forth, trains that speed away, remaining in the distance, forever forsaken. The shores can no longer be seen. As you turn from them, I dare you to love, if you can, your enemies. To forget, if you can, your friends.
My great-aunt Dina shared her large eyes with her father and her serene disposition with her mother. But nobody could tie her exotic looks to any known lineage, except possibly the worldwide Averbuk rabbinic dynasty. Dina did not actively crave learning, but became the first Averbuk child and the first girl to receive formal education in an era that forbade educating girls.
Tata would always say, "What does she need an education for?" But my sister Hannah, the queen bee, 19 years older than me and married, thought differently. She hatched a scheme for me to be enrolled in a Jewish elementary school for girls, and then into gymnasia, high school, in Boguslav, where she lived. The deal, struck with Tata, was that after high school I would return home to Bena to get married. My graduation from high school coincided with the peak of revolutionary destruction, pogroms, and the typhus epidemics. Hannah would not let me out of her sight. Travel was out of the question. Even showing up in the street was dangerous. Consequently, I did not return to my parents' home to find a husband as originally agreed. But Being vigilant did not mean keeping me from the company of lovesick males, meaning that Hannah now had an opportunity to shine as a matchmaker. And shine she did. A match was made, Janvels Mettinen, older than me, dashing and fancy mustached. He was in line to get half his parents' house, as my letter to Tata reported. I also wrote that Hannah promised to give me silver candlesticks and a swanky bed cover, further testimony that my beloved came from money. But before my letter to Tata asking permission to be married was delivered by the unreliable mail service, I was already married.
Dina lost her husband to typhus when their baby daughter Chaya was only 6 weeks old. She had to move back in with her sister Hannah and spent the next 3 years supported by Hannah's gold coins.
Because of the recent pogroms, Hannah decided that I should get out of the shtetl, and that the best way to do that was by finding a husband who lived in a big city. She asked a cousin in Leningrad for help, and as soon as a candidate emerged, we took a week-long train journey, traveling there with my Chaya to meet him. He was an office worker, an ordinary-looking man, balding, shorter than me, and much older. His last name was Levenstein. Hannah set out to learn all about Levenstein. She approved for the most part, although she was skeptical of his love for chess and his stomach ulcers. He had settled in Leningrad several years earlier, after a pogrom in his shtetl had wiped out his family. While his wife and children were being murdered, he was out of the house checking up on his parents. As he ran back home through a wooded path, his parents were murdered. It did not take long for him to propose to me, perhaps out of empathy as much as attraction. We shared much sadness.
In doing my research, we could find no record of Levenstein's first name. So, Levenstein he is.
Since religious ceremonies were now prohibited in the Soviet Union, we registered our marriage in a government office, and then took a streetcar to Levenstein's small room in a communal apartment in the far outskirts of Leningrad. In this new life, I spent my days searching for food so that Levenstein would have fresh meals right out of the oven and that Chaya would be well nourished. When the Eastern Front of World War II reached us on June 22 of 1941, my daughter was 19 years old. She had grown into a brave adult. She had to be. By September, the German army had encircled Leningrad. It was stopped only a short distance from our apartment building. Bombs and bullets fell close by every day. As the siege continued, food rations shrank to next to nothing. Despite my valiant efforts, Levenstein soon died of hunger. That winter, the Russian army carved out a route over frozen Lake Ladoga to bring supplies and munitions into Leningrad and to evacuate the civilians out of the city. That spring, I joined the crowd by the docks, hoping to eventually get on a boat with my daughter and escape the siege of Leningrad. While I waited on the line to board a boat to safety, Chaya's job was to get our daily bread ration. This was hunger time. No one had energy. Even walking was a chore. But so many thousands and thousands of us did what we had to do to survive.
One day, when Chaya arrived with the bread rations for her mother, she was told that Dina had died of hunger the night before and had already been taken away for burial in a mass grave. My great-aunt Dina died 3 years before I was born.
From here to there, is it far? Just a step. Everything is prepared, all is ready. Even the angel with wings folded like tired arms. Waits at the crossroads of time to kiss my forehead, that I should forget all, that I should become like him, without smile, sadness, or tears.
His siblings unanimously loved my great-uncle Yunkel Shmuel, Kutsia, the most. They described him as
The handsomest,
The tallest.
The brightest.
The wittiest.
and the gentlest. The mention of his name lit up his sisters' faces. Normally undemonstrative, they reminisced about him with wide smiles, teenage excitement, and an envy reserved for the naughty.
And naughty I was. Pranks, jokes, somersaults, anything to avoid studying. Forced by Tata to spend hours over books, I fidgeted and jumped up and down and wrote lyrics that made fun of my sisters. Spanking did not help. My mate defended me to Tata. What's the use of staring at a book? But Tata always got the last word. One must look inside the prayer book. His brain will retain something. Unlike my brother Avram, I had no interest in revolution or politics. I inherited my paternal grandfather's gift for evaluating fabric by touch. I started making money after my bar mitzvah. Being a responsible businessman, however, did not prevent me from churning out verses mocking my customers who did not always appreciate my sense of humor and complained to Tata. But even the complainers could not resist my charm. Also, unlike Avram, I let Tata find a match for me. Kaya was a rabbi's orphan from another shtetl, and was as timid as I was mischievous. She fell in love with me at first sight.
And who would not fall in love with him? His sisters asked rhetorically.
We had a proper and traditional wedding. In less than 2 years, Chaya gave birth to our 2 boys, who Mame was relieved to observe showed no propensity for naughtiness. Tragically, they both died quite young of typhus. But then, conscription time. The Tsar's armies came. A 20-year enlistment. Long-term guests of the Russian Empire, we shtetl Jews had developed a laundry list of methods to avoid being drafted. Some of them more extreme than others. Most of these methods involve going to permanent hiding or pretending to be an invalid to convince the medical committee that you are physically not able to serve. Whether you were drafted or even where you were assigned was based on how healthy you looked. And my good looks, God save me, likely would have qualified me for the Imperial Guard. 20-year enlistment. No way. After much consideration of various methods to avoid the draft, I chose the easiest and, rumor had it, surefire recipe. It was definitely less dramatic than amputated toe, which some people did. I drank some vinegar to cause my skin to yellow, thereby getting certified as ineligible. After which I just needed to wait for skin to clear. Little did I know that an apple bush should not take for granted his liver.
So, while Kutsia did manage to dodge the draft, his skin did not clear. He died at the age of 27. Vinegar never entered an Averbach home in the old country again.
From a high mountain, I see how the banks of a river shiver. I look down into the river where my face's tinder is quenched, and my body shines, clear, transparent, and I say to the east, west, north, south, look and see how beneath cold leaves and houses, in river writing my name is written. Broadcasted all over the world. Amen.
I knew my great Aunt Esther well. She visited us in Kiev almost every year. We were quite fond of each other. Esther was the baby born after a 5-year gap caused by an infection. Esther joked that, thankfully,
Mama got cured and I was born.
she had a legendary sense of humor and laughed contagiously. Had she been the oldest, Esther would have made a consummate queen bee. But being the youngest, she had no choice but to take the opposite path.
I loved how my older siblings pampered me and how the other men admired me. I was the most attractive of the Overbrook girls. Few chores were expected of me, so I spent most of my time giggling and with my girlfriends and reading. I graduated from Gymnasia for Girls with a gold medal, but I did not contemplate further studies or acquiring an office job given my academic achievements. After all, the husband of a gorgeous and genius girl would be so honored to have me that he would not let me work. As it happened, in my late teens, I married Srul, an intelligent, hardworking man, and how I mocked his appearance. He was stooped, not very tall, and wearing thick glasses. Yet no one would have loved me more.
After receiving his graduate degree, Srul was placed as chief engineer at a factory in a small Ukrainian town. It was the number 2 position.
The factory assigned him a chauffeured car and half of a house requisitioned from a laborer. The laborer's wife babysat our little girl, Valia, named after Tata, who had died 6 years earlier in 1922. My husband, warm, kind-hearted, and unassuming, was well-liked. I took every advantage of his reputation and my second lady status. I entertained the factory and the town bigwigs, had Srul's chauffeur take me shopping to the larger town, had the laborers' wives cook and clean for me.
But their privileged life ended abruptly at the beginning of the 1930s. Srul's superiors had the decency to warn him that he was going to be arrested for spying on behalf of Japan, and that Esther and Valia were going to be sent into exile. Supposedly, spies were everywhere during those times. It did not matter what country you were spying for, since it was all Stalin's invention.
The night Srul was warned. Our landlord took us to the train station. We boarded a train to Odessa where Srul had friends. We were safe for the time being. The authorities did not pursue those who were not at home at the time of arrest, since it wasn't like the charges were real. In Odessa, Srul found a teaching job at a technical college. The job paid little and had no perks for me. But Odessa, being a cultural city with a significant Jewish population, gave me the opportunity to gather a few Jewish writers and scientists. My intellectual salon. We met regularly to discuss art, literature, philosophy, and so on. But Stalin's purges promptly snuffed out the life of my salon, as well as the life of most of its participants. Thankfully, their association with me and Srul never came to light.
During this anxious period, their son Gregory was born. The ritual circumcision, bris, was not yet officially banned in the Soviet Union, but it was becoming much less common because of fear of marking the son as religious, or a lack of mohels to perform it, or the increasingly progressive views of parents.
I came up with a plot to give Gregory a bris that would protect Sroul's job. We hoped. He went away on a business trip. I placed the baby in a wicker basket and took a train to a shtetl where an old moil still functioned, albeit by trusted reference only. Sroul would return home shocked to discover what his insubordinate wife had done in his absence and without his knowledge. That was the scenario we were going to stick with if found out. Whether it would have saved us had we been reported was anybody's guess.
When World War II began, Sroul's poor eyesight kept him from being drafted. The technical college where he taught evacuated its staff who were not draft eligible to Siberia, including Sroul, along with Esther, Gregory, and Valya, who was not well.
Sroul was drafted eventually, but since he could only see a few meters in front of him, he could not be trusted with a weapon. They used his math skills to calculate cannon projectiles, but they had to lead him by hand from position to position so he would not wander off. The army discharged him after 3 months. Meanwhile, I concentrated on caring for my children, especially Valya, who was showing signs of kidney disease. She was getting worse. I did everything I knew to do and could do, and she was 15 when she died.
After the war, Esther, Sroul, and Gregory returned to Odessa. She never completely recovered from the loss of her daughter and became surly, sullen, susceptible to brief, frenetic bursts of energy and fierce man-chasing that panicked her siblings. When Esther came to visit us in Kiev, each visit began with her bawling on Paulina's shoulders. By the time they finished talking, Esther was pouting, and it was Paulina who was crying. Paulina could not forgive her baby sister for wasting the brilliant academic abilities that nature had gave her. In 1975, Esther and Sroul, both in poor health, arrived in San Francisco. Gregory had immigrated there earlier that year. They were the third family of Soviet Jews to be saved in those years, thanks to the Save Soviet Jewry movement.
The clothes in which you saw me, they'll never grow old. With all their colors, they'll go on blossoming in my closet. The violet dress whispers to the green a green and grassy secret. The rose clings to the yellow. And at the bottom of their hems, the flowers continue to blossom. Removed and special, in a corner all its own, its arms thrown up over its shoulder. My blue dress is dreaming of you.
I knew my great-uncle Leib very well, having spent a considerable time with him for much of my life in the Soviet Union. Taller than his oldest brother Avram, Leib was like him in appearance and intellect. Gratified to have a scholarly son again, Velvel was, however, deprived of the chance to homeschool him. It was a different world, a world of revolution. Jewish education was unwanted and useless. Young Jews like Leib craved a secular education. Leib chose to attend gymnasia, not a secular high school, not Velvel's academy. And he did not ask permission to do so. He graduated with a gold medal, straight A's, and was especially fond of literature. He read all the time.
Letters from a cousin in a faraway city of Leningrad made me yearn for library bookshelves and the university lectures there. But Tata would have been crushed if he lost me. After Tata's funeral, Mama said, "Go to Leningrad already. Jews could live in big cities after the revolution."
Labe enrolled in engineering college. Everyone had the right to an education now, but only if they belonged to the proletariat. The rest, like Labe, had to take tests and hope for a vacant spot. He got in, but wondered what would happen when the laborers and peasants graduated and were no longer considered proletarians.
I so wanted to say to them, "So you've prevailed. Now what?" But it was not a time that encouraged questions, or, God forbid, doubts.
He sensed that asking his questions would be considered dangerous, if not incendiary. Labe dropped out of college and vowed to stay away from the new order.
I found clerical work, rented a bed in someone's room, walked several kilometers once a month to a post office to ship Mama food, strolled down Nevsky Prospect, taking in the architecture, and I read, hungrily, eagerly. I was quickly promoted to the head of bookkeeping, and I married a golden-haired librarian, a deacon's daughter.
Labe did not share his marital news with his family, nor the news about the birth of his son. Shana Gittel could handle anything except the knowledge that her son had married outside the faith, and that her grandson was not Jewish. But their son died quite young, and he and his wife divorced a year later. Labe then rented an inexpensive room in a 9-room communal apartment. 6 different families occupied 6 of the rooms. Another family of previously high aristocratic status occupied the other rooms and rented one out to make ends meet. Before the revolution, all 9 rooms belonged to them. But after the revolution, their status became lishentsy, people who were deprived of their rights and property.
The oldest child in the family was Maria, nicknamed Mutzia. As I got to know her, we realized we liked each other a great bit. During our secret courtship, she admitted to me that her formerly aristocratic family held their collective noses where Jews were concerned. A personal relationship with a Jew was unthinkable, particularly with the renter, and particularly with a renter born of uneducated parents from a backwater town. But we decided to marry. Mutzia chose her birthday party to inform her. Mutzia chose her birthday party to make the announcement to her family. I attended as well. Her family and friends all liked me, but in an abstract way, people like a servant. So they were taken aback by my presence at the table. When she announced that we were engaged, their family did not react visibly. Her mother shielded her face with a fan, but Mutzia's cousin, Katya, nodded approvingly. One of the cousins said mockingly, "I have to tell you, Labe, your manners are impeccable. May I ask who taught you manners?" I responded courteously, "My illiterate mother." Mutzia's relatives never mocked me again.
Shana Gittel did not learn about Labe's second marriage either, though his sisters knew. To them, Mutzia remained a respected but alien wife of a beloved brother.
After the war, I worked as head of bookkeeping at an engineering firm. Soon after my retirement, Mutzia began exhibiting signs of dementia. She did not recognize me any longer. But I visited her every day, no matter the weather, for 3 years, until her last day.
My first time in Leningrad was in January 1962, during my high school winter break. My visit coincided with the first day of Leib's retirement. These were the years of Khrushchev's thaw, when the political and cultural climate in the Soviet Union relaxed. Yevtushenko's galvanizing poem, Babi Yar, had just been published. A miracle. Like so many others, especially those my age, I knew the poem by heart. As I waited at the train station for Leib to meet me, I recited Babi Yar to myself again and again. Yevtushenko's poem rang out like a bell, summoning people's consciousness. The word Jew, uttered in public, uttered with respect, uttered with compassion, and printed for everyone to see. When Leib arrived, I recited the whole poem for him. He watched and listened with a patronizing smile. It ended with these stirring words. May International thunder and ring, when for all time is buried and forgotten the last of anti-Semites on this earth. There is no Jewish blood that's blood of mine, but hated with a passion that's corrosive am I by anti-Semites like a Jew. And that is why I call myself a Russian. In my exhilaration, I proclaimed that we had entered a renaissance, not merely Khrushchev's thaw. Leib raised his brows above his glasses.
Sure. After a 40-year entombment, a mat to sleep on is the Renaissance. Homes will come, and arrests will be fewer. And then what? The party will still tell us what to think.
It took my tears to get him to take me to a reading by Yevtushenko. But another miracle. He liked what he saw and got swept up in the excitement of the wide-eyed audience where he was the oldest by far. He had avoided books by Soviet authors because he did not accept socialist realism as a genre. But now, he asked me to recommend what to read and checked out my recommendations to keep in pace with me. We spent our evenings talking. I gushed about the freedom and promise of a post-Stalin era. The future belongs to me, as I put it. But Leib generated doubts that I did not want to have.
Khrushchev is not giving us freedom. People are born free. Freedom cannot be given. But at times you have to lock it away inside of you. Do you know what cannot be locked away? Menschlichkeit. Being a mensch.
I agreed with him that Stalin was a criminal, but insisted that Lenin was a saint.
My dear, Lenin was a political prostitute. A person without a conscience. He invented concentration camps, and he was a murderer.
I gasped at such sacrilege. But Leib would not relent and was determined to set me straight. Hidden behind bookshelves were Muzia's pre-revolution newspapers and magazines. He placed a stack in front of me, and he placed two encyclopedias in front of me, one from before the revolution, and the other a Soviet edition. In the old one, it mentioned that Russia had lost a particular war. In the Soviet one, it mentioned that Russia had won that same war.
Russia lost that war. Nothing built on lies is justifiable or ends well. To remain a mensch, you must think and understand. And to survive, you must keep quiet and stay away.
He watched me pore through these materials. When I came up for air, I was disoriented and jolted out of my teenage cocoon.
After what you have learned, would you want a friend like Lenin? So why would you allow him to define you? And still, after this thaw, you can be arrested for reading, writing, and speaking out.
Leib possessed a breathtaking knowledge of Russian and Soviet history and a vast and unforgiving memory. Before our many visits, I prepared arguments to counter his reasoning, and each time he quashed them without seemingly trying to and without raising his voice.
Have you listened to the words of the songs you were being taught? Bravely we'll go to battle for Soviet rule, and all is one, we will die in the struggle for it. Suppose we all do die. And then what?
With Leib, it was not a matter of proving his case in a quarrel. It was a matter of resetting my brain, wiring it to recognize logic. Everything was simple. All I needed to do was think. Leib's dream project for retirement was adding English to his cache of languages. He acquired a thick grammar textbook, an unwieldy Russian-English dictionary, a 2-volume English-Russian dictionary, and began with Shakespeare. 4 years later, when he read and understood the bard easily, he placed the grammar book and his dictionaries into a capacious avoska and handed them to me as I was packing for my return trip home one summer. He suddenly decided that it was useless at his age to learn a new language.
I cannot throw out books. You do what you want with them.
I could not throw out books either. Instead, I began learning English, not with Shakespeare, but modestly with the basics. I still have the grammar books. As the 1970s began, emigration became the leading topic of conversation in our family, as it was for many others. My parents, my husband, and I, along with our 2 daughters, were going to apply to get out. Even though he was not well, Leib planned to emigrate with us and take Katya, his late wife's sister, with him as a wife, so as not to leave her behind all alone. He spent our last summer in the Soviet Union with us in Kiev. He loved opening the newspaper, pointing to different places and repeating,
Lie! 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 One does not have to read it to know what our government reports is a lie.
He could not have cheered our decision to emigrate more had I been his daughter.
It will take time, but eventually you'll become a different person. Don't fight it.
As the time was approaching to apply for permission to emigrate, the pain that Leib had been living with became severe. Various medical luminaries could not come up with a diagnosis. Finally, he told me to proceed without him. I offered to wait, and for the first time, his grumble was filled with tears.
Please leave. I'm 75. It doesn't matter where I die. You have small children. If you get stuck, I will not forgive myself. Leave. Leave. Leave.
6 weeks after my family emigrated from the Soviet Union in 1976, Leib died of cancer of the liver.
Willful and avid, the Russian mind is as dangerous as flame. So unrestrainable, so clear. It is a happy and a gloomy mind. Like the steady hand of a compass, it sees the pole through swells and fog, and leads the timid will from distracted dreams to life. Like the the eagle, staring at the dust on the ground, soberly contemplates the earth, floating in a mystic night.
There remains one more child of Velvel and Shklyanoy, my beloved grandmother, Paulina. Her given name was Sipora, but she was Sipa to her parents. She disliked that nickname. In Russian, it represents zip, 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 the sound used to get a chicken's attention. She insisted on being called Pearl. Later on, when living in Kiev, Pearl morphed into its most common Russian equivalent, Paulina. This portrait of her hangs in my office at home. She talks to me all the time. I grew up with Paulina and lived both with her and near her until she died in 1972, when I was in my late 20s. She was precious. Rebellion appealed to her. Out with arranged marriages, with uneducated women, with men praying and making children they could not feed. However, this new socialist path to universal happiness did not add up to common sense for her, like it did for so many other Jews, including some on other branches of my family tree. She catastrophized the time she lived in and felt quite alone in her assessment. The Bolshevik Revolution may have elevated the Jews to equality with workers and peasants, but at the price of Jewish tradition, what was there to crow about?
After Mama taught me to read, I spent my childhood as a gopher and nanny. Sadly, as I witnessed the death of 9 of my little siblings whom I helped care for. During Tata's lessons with his students, I hovered nearby, under the guise of any chore that allowed me to eavesdrop. Some of the comments I allowed to escape from my mouth shocked Tata into admitting that, for a girl, I grasped the subject deeper than many of his pupils, maybe even as deeply as Avram had grasped it at my age. His praise raised my hope that he would bend his no-schooling for girls rule. Without seeking approval, Mama enrolled me in a Jewish elementary school for girls. I attended it for only one day, though, before Tata pulled me out. A girl does not need education. The household needs help. Neither my tears nor Mama's entreaties softened Tata's stance. Fortunately, my younger sisters, Dina and Esther, got to attend school, and Tata could do nothing about it. When I was 7, as my older sister Hannah became engrossed in groom selection, I took over most of the house cleaning too. I soon began experimenting with recipes that had gone unchallenged for generations, and I volunteered to darn, knit, needlepoint, and mend.
Her creative eye, nimble fingers, and efficiency were so important to the family that Shklyanoy invested in a used hand-driven sewing machine with fancy gilt lettering, Singer 1873. That machine obeyed Paulina for 60-some years until spare parts could no longer be found. She considered the dress she made for my mother Rahel around 1960 for some extra special occasion, and the house robe she made me for my 25th birthday in 1970 as her crowning achievements. When a 20-year-old gentleman named Bena from the town of Korsun graduated from yeshiva, his first order of the day was to find a bride. His older sister, who had married a watchmaker from Belyat Tserkov, recommended going there and consulting Velvel. I love this story.
Bena arrived at our house on a Friday afternoon. I was barefoot, washing the stoop with a rag, the last task in pre-Sabbath cleaning. Unbeknownst to me, Bena stared at my heavy braid that rested along my spine as I was scrubbing the steps. With the front hem of my skirt tucked into the waistband, my calves were visible. When I was done, Bena bowed respectfully in an attempt to cover his staring and entered the house. I later confessed that I had fallen in love with Bena then and there, but had quashed the feeling because I was only 13 and took him for just another of Tata's visitors, possibly already married. Instead of asking to go through the formalities of a shidduch, Bena asked right away, Tata for my hand. Me, the beautiful girl with a long braid who just finished washing the stoop.
He did not mention the bare legs, Paulina always noted with a mischievous smile.
Tata chastised Bena, an unmarried boy, for soliciting a shidduch without his father present. And anyway, I could not consent to marriage until I was 18. Bena told Tata, my parents were married at her age, but if that is the custom in your family, I will wait.
Velvel did not invite the disrespectful boy to share the Sabbath meal with the family. But Bena stayed in Belayat-Zerkov. He kept books for several small businesses and eventually attended every Sabbath meal at Velvel's house.
He sought my unchaperoned company, something Tata specifically, but uselessly, forbade. Dina, Labe, and Esther served sentry duty for our forbidden encounters, which were brief, but sufficient to slip in a kiss. In 1911, we did get married. By then, Bena had saved up enough to put an advance on a 2-room house. For the wedding, I wore those shoes Hannah gave me when she moved away. Escorted by her beloved Chaim wearing a top hat, she showed up at the nuptials with a swanky plush bed cover for us. Proof that I had married well.
Paulina had much to brag about in her letters to her brother Avram in Philadelphia.
My marriage is not an arranged one, but was made for love. I married into a learned and well-to-do family. But I will not let Bena take a rabbi position and force me to accept a passé role of rebbitzin. And I made my own wedding dress from new, never used before material.
Paulina distinguished herself in Belayat-Zerkov as avant-garde in 2 categories. As the first Jewish bride to do away with a traditional white gown in favor of a regular dress, and as the first Jewish wife not to cover her hair with a tichel, but to simply coil her braids around her head. Paulina sent Avram a wedding picture. Avram's daughter gave me that photo 70 years later. A note on the back says, Aunt Pearl. They named their first child, my mother, Rahil. Bena ended up a bookkeeper, and in a concession from Paulina, a Kazioni Rabbi, a part-time government rabbi for the empire, registering marriages, births, etc. Another round of pogroms in 1919 drove Bena's parents out of their shtetl and into Kharkov, then the capital of Ukraine, where his siblings had moved earlier. Bena considered having them move there to be near them, but
I refused to leave my parents. Even so, since he was not receiving letters from his family, Bena decided to travel to Kharkov to check up on his pregnant sister. He planned to return home again in time for the birth of our next baby. After a 7-year wait, I was finally pregnant again.
The grubby cattle trains that transported people also transported germs. Bena was already sick with typhus by the time he arrived at his sister's home. And in a short time, he was gone. He was 35. He was buried in a mass grave.
I gave birth to a boy before I knew that Bena had died. Had I known, I would have named the baby Bena. But instead, I named the baby Shmuel, after my brother Yankel Shmuel, Kutsia, who had died from the vinegar.
Shmuel lived 1 month. Paulina was also suffering from typhus, delirious and burning with fever. She was so ill that she did not know that both her husband and infant son had died. She was not expected to survive. Kutsia's widow Chaya buried the infant and miraculously nursed Paulina back to life. When Paulina was told what had happened, she screamed so loud and so long that Chaya feared her veins would burst. As soon as she could function again, Paulina moved back in with her parents. She brought only a few bundles of clothing with her, but left the house that she and Bena had lived in unlocked, never to return. I was named after my grandfather Bena, and I often heard from Paulina that when I was born,
God has rewarded me more than I could dare to ask for letting me utter the name Bena thousands of times.
it did not matter that Bena was a man's name, because it was the only name for her grandchild, boy or girl. In the marriage market following the typhus epidemic, Paulina was a catch. 28 years old, only one child, the bonus of Yechis lineage, beauty, and substantial housekeeping talents. She had her pick among the many proposals that came her way, and she had the same answer for each contender.
There can be no one like Bena, and I don't want anybody different.
She was so sought after that the marriage proposals continued until Paulina was in her 60s. On one of the last occasions, I was amused by Paulina's response.
You must have been meshuggah to hope that I would leave you, my only grandchild, to wash a man's underpants.
After her mother died in 1932, Paulina went on to live in Kiev in a single room of a communal apartment that housed a dozen families.
Your mother and I lived in a 100-square-foot windowless room off the kitchen. One of the other residents of our communal apartment was a prostitute. There was one in your Uncle Leib's apartment in Leningrad as well. The government thought that the neighbors would reform their characters.
A few years later, in June of 1941, Hitler invaded the Soviet Union. Those who thought about evacuating east had just a few weeks to get out of Kiev.
I was inclined to stay and guard our room from being snatched up. But your mother insisted, and I finally agreed to evacuate. Thus, we avoided the Nazi massacre at Baba Yar. We left Kiev in the nick of time. I carried my sewing machine, thread bobbins, some fabric, and a supply of elastic for our underwear.
After some miserable interludes in tiny, barely civilized towns, they settled in Barnaul, a regional center in southwest Siberia. The lady who rented them a room had never seen Jews before, though she knew enough to dislike them.
What? No horns?
To keep from starving, they depended to a large degree on creative bartering of food rations and belongings at flea markets. The market in Barnaul grew at the beginning of the war, along with the city.
We had nothing to trade for food. As a working adult, your mother was eligible for a full ration of rye dough. But one day, the factory where she worked replaced some of the dough with pure alcohol. That's when my mother's entrepreneurial gene came alive in me. She sold tichels, I sold alcohol. At the market, the little jars of alcohol flew out of my hands, despite the exorbitant price of 2 large potatoes for each. Most buyers drank down the jars right in front of me, grunting with pleasure and handing me empty jars back. With part of the proceeds, I bought wide skirts from local women, opened them at the seams, pressed them with my landlady's iron, and whipped out child-sized skirts and dresses that proved as popular with the women as the alcohol was with the men. But I was careful not to grow our little enterprise, not to show up too often, or with large quantities, or at the same spot, or at regular intervals. Being an entrepreneur could lead to trouble, bringing charges of capitalist exploitation, and in wartime, even treason. Yet, we lived opulently, relatively speaking. No more grumbling stomachs for us.
After the war, they returned to Kiev, where my mother married my father. Paulina lived with us. As I grew up, Paulina watched me do my homework, attempted and failed to improve my sprawling handwriting, directed my home rehearsals for school recitals, and listened to me. Paulina governed with few rules. Breakfast, a big affair of yesterday's dinner leftovers with bread and butter, was the law of the land, as was no snack between meals. Soup was the gateway to any dinner. She could not teach me the Jewish dietary laws and run the risk that I might tell others that we keep kosher, meaning that we were religious. Even so, she wanted me to observe them in a limited way, even under false pretenses.
Do not drink milk after eating meat. It will give you a stomachache.
Once I washed down a meat patty with some milk, which was the only beverage available at that cafe. My stomach did not hurt, but Paulina groaned.
Face me here.
In 1960, Paulina suffered a heart attack and was told to remain on her back for a month. While she was recovering, I untangled her hair, strand by strand, and read to her. We began with Uncle Tom's Cabin, which she took to right away, even asking me to repeat some chapters. We both memorized large chunks of the novel. Paulina recovered. In her late 70s, Paulina began suffering from recurring pneumonia that left her weak and pale and left me scared. Our communal neighbor always kept the kitchen window open and cooked wearing a quilted coat and felt boots. She refused to close the window, even in the winter when Paulina was in the kitchen. "Jews are weaklings," she shouted. I hissed back at her, my nose an inch from her face. "If my babushka gets sick again, I'll kill you." This wiry peasant woman could have knocked me down in a flash, but incredibly, she gave in and closed the window. By the time I got married, we had a large 2-room private apartment. My husband Dima moved in with us. Our living arrangement changed when Dima managed to join a new thing called co-op. We built a small 2-room private apartment and then swapped it with my parents. Paulina would have preferred to stay with Dima and me, but she had to live with my parents. Dima and I were at work all day, and Paulina was not well. My parents had retired by then and were able to care for her. For the last 6 months of her life, and for the first time in her life, Paulina had her own private room. As Paulina was leaving the old apartment for the last time, she whispered in my ear,
Don't be upset. I'm always here. Even when I'm not here.
Throughout her life, reading, storytelling, and letter writing were Paulina's passions. She was the only one of her siblings to write to Avram in Philadelphia. She encouraged my mother to keep in touch with Avram's daughter, Ruth. My mother kept a greeting card from Ruth for a long time. But beginning in the early 1930s, having a relative abroad served as evidence of spying. So my mother had to burn the card, and Paulina broke off her correspondence with Avram. Paulina's brother Leib in Leningrad was her soulmate. They devoted pages of philosophical observations and discussions of word meanings. Leib lamented the absence of Yiddish publications in the Soviet Union, as every one of Paulina's letters, in his opinion, was a publisher-ready short story or essay. As, like her father Velvel had prodded her, Paulina prodded me as I was growing up.
Think, my child, suppose you prevail.
In due course, I realized that she had wanted me to answer, and then what, to myself before I acted. In conversation, Paulina was quick at coming up with succinct observations worthy to stand next to her father's. Looking back, countless subliminal messages must have flown by me unnoticed, until some hit the mark later in life, leaving an indelible impression on me.
Better not to wear tight clothes. Let the boys guess. It's their job. Boys may look at you more if you wear tight clothes, but how will you know what they think?
If you must do something, enjoy it. Otherwise, you'll lead a miserable life.
In fateful moments, you're responsible for your children, not your parents. The children are the future.
When you give your children the last crust of bread, let them believe that you are not hungry. Mentioning sacrifice will make them feel guilty.
Ask for a tad more than you actually want, so that when you get less, and people always get less, it will be exactly what you wanted.
And I especially remember her saying to me when, as a teenager, I expressed doubt that old people knew anything.
If people know nothing when they are old, then you too will know nothing when you are old.
I use this logic on my teenage children. It worked. Paulina died at home in 1972. She was a month short of her 82nd birthday. Several hours before she died, Paulina was playing 501 with my parents, a card game for 3. They played every day. She interrupted the game to pick up the phone and call me with a reminder to put away the summer clothes for the winter. Several days earlier, she had handed me and my daughter Emily the traditional Hanukkah gift in her usual amount of 72 kopecks. I knew what gelt meant, money, but not what Hanukkah meant.
The hour when woman sows her modest seed.
Brings silence, peace, and space for sweet reflection.
Far from the worldly crowd, she sunk in contemplation.
Then she may read her soul, may gaze upon herself.
Full work table ahead, she sits.
And stitches rapidly, absorbed in what she sows.
When Soviet children turned 9 years old, they took seriously the right, rather the obligation, to join the Pioneer Organization and thus become Lenin's grandchildren. When I became a pioneer, I was trusted to open the festivities by reciting the sacred communist anthem, the Internationale. Like my great-uncle later, Paulina did all she could to prevent the Soviet mindset from taking hold in me. She tensed when she heard me practicing the words of the anthem. We'll demolish the world of oppression completely, then we'll build our own new world in its place. Who was a nothing will become an everything.
What do you mean, smash the world of oppression? One must first salvage what's usable, or how will you know how to build a new world? And remember that when a servant becomes an overseer, no good will come of it. Let's suppose all this happens. Und was weiter? And then what? Tracht, mein Kind. Think, my child.
I arrived home from the festivities, flushed with pride, wearing my red neck scarf and the pioneer pin on the wing of my pinafore. I announced, now I am a true Lenin's granddaughter.
Lenin's granddaughter. Why Lenin's? You had 2 wonderful grandfathers. Think, my child. Suppose you prevail.
And then what?
My name is Bena. I was born in Chicago in 1976 when I was 31 years old. On September 15th of that year, I arrived in my new country with Dima, his mother, and our 2 daughters, Emily and Paulina. My parents arrived the next year. We were 7 of the thousands of Soviet Jews who were saved in those years thanks to the Save Soviet Jewry movement. When we got off the plane, a Mr. Vayner from the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society met us. A hearty, "Welcome to Chicago," exhausted his Russian vocabulary. "Sprech du Yiddish? Do you speak Yiddish?" he asked. "Yovone, yes, of course," we answered, much to his relief. He drove us to the corner of West Morse Avenue and North Ashland Avenue in East Rogers Park. He pointed to a 4-story building and gave us a key to a 1-bedroom furnished apartment on the 2nd floor, where Jewish Family and Community Services had delivered 2 brand new mattresses as a gift. We signed for a $10 bill he produced. On a scrap of paper, he scribbled, "Tomorrow, 9 a.m., go to the JFCS office, 2710 West Devon Avenue." Fist in the air, he proclaimed, "Gehensi in Dreert, let the earth swallow them," meaning the Soviet Union. "Sei gesund. Sei mazeldik. Be well. Be fortunate," he added, and he was gone. And then what? Dima and I both secured good jobs eventually. We sponsored other immigrants. Dima passed away in 2002. Our daughters married. I have 5 grandchildren, the great-great-great-grandchildren of Velvel and Shana Gittel. For 11 years following my mother's death in 2004, I researched and wrote my family story, meeting and keeping in touch with cousins, the descendants of Avram, Dina, and Esther Averbuch, and of other branches of my family tree, those in the US, in Israel, in Germany, and those who stayed behind in Russia and Ukraine. With help from many people and travels to the old country, I created this website. It contains my Yerusha, my inheritance, my legacy, and my possession to pass on to the new branches of the tree that are growing and are yet to grow.
For some, the apple does not fall far from the tree, but it really does not fall at all, because you belong to a family. You don't ever need to see them. You don't even need to know them. You are always part of that family.